Hello everyone, today we're gonna talk about World War II, and that's, for now, that's a major situation, conflict, war that impacts to whole world, and now we live like this because of the things that happened during this time. So this war happened on 1939 and lasted on 1945, and the vast majority of the world countries, including all the great powers, fought as a part of two opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis. Many participant countries invested all available economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities into this total war, blurring the distinction between civilian and military resources. Aircraft played a major role, enabling the strategic bombing of population centers and delivery of the only two nuclear weapons ever used in the war. It was by far the deadliest conflict in history, resulting in 70 to 85 million fatalities. So, let's talk more about this, what just been said. So, aircraft. So Germany, as like Nazi Germany, they had lots of aircrafts and they used them for bombing. So, and also they have lots of marine and they tried to attack Britain with their marines, but Britain had more power with aircrafts, and that's helped them to defeat Germany. So and about nuclear power, so nuclear weapons. States use nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, because Japan was on the one side with Nazi Germany, so that's had a major impact on Japan, on the whole, even on the whole world, to be honest, because people saw what is actual nuclear power, how can it impact on people's lives, and just very sad. And millions died due to genocides, including the Holocaust. So the Nazi Germany and their head of government, Adolf Hitler, he wanted to destroy the Jews, their nation. So I bet you probably seen what happened in Poland. They had lots of like camps where they put in prison lots of Jews, not really only Jews. There could be other people, but mostly there were Jews, and the most tragic ones and sadly known as Auschwitz. That's I think it's about like hour or 2 hours drive from Krakow in Poland, and there died from 7 up to 10 million people, approximately, yeah. And also they had like starvation, massacres, and disease. In the wake of Axis defeat, Germany, Austria, and Japan were occupied, and war crimes tribunals were conducted against German and Japanese leaders. So let's talk more about the Holocaust. There are like a theory why Hitler hated Jews, because his auntie was she was like a Jew, and they had a bad relationships, and that may cause it. But to be honest, it just could be like a propaganda or something that we don't know why. And lots of Jews used to live in Poland. I've been to Krakow Museum of Schindler, and they says that like even about third part of all citizens in Krakow were Jews. They have a Jew district Kazimierz, and what happened with the Jews, it's just unbelievable, because just because of your ethic, on your ethnic background, they could kill you, could ruin your life, and it's just awful, because you can't decide what nation are you gonna be, or what's your ethnicity gonna be. You just was born this way, yeah. And in Krakow they made part of Jews districts as it's like closed prisons. They couldn't have enough food or just things for normal life. They just could come and do whatever they want, and kill people, yeah. And by the end of the occupation, they just came to the Jews district that killed a lot of people, or brought them to prisons, or these camps like Auschwitz. And these people, they didn't have any rights. And for example, during German occupation, the just German militaries, German troops, they just could come and live in any apartment they wanted. They just could let people went outside, make them live their house, flats, apartments, whatever they lived in. And that's a ridiculous thing. Also, about Holocaust, they had these camps not only in Poland. Sometimes they could send these people to Germany. They had some camps in Germany, for example, in Leipzig, yeah. They could be just their slaves, and I just work on a military factories or something like this. Sometimes the German people could just buy them or get them for free to work for their household. That's unbelievable. So the causes of the war are debated. Contributing factors included the rise of fascism in Europe, the Spanish Civil War, the Second Sino-Japanese War, Soviet-Japanese border conflicts, and tensions in the aftermath of World War One. Yes, so I think mainly that's because of unresolved conflicts in the World War One. We had World War Two. Germany was left on their own in a destroyed economy, and people were really upset about what happened, and they just gave up. And but their fascist leaders into that, they decided just to earn what they wanted on these people, and they make them believe that they are the most powerful nations, that they need to be on the top, they need to rule the Europe, rule the world, and that's what happened. So World War II, generally considered to have begun on 1st September 1939 with Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. Um, they, I know that Poland, they didn't fight for too much. They had some fights, but Poland was really weak. So the United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany on 3rd September, and under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union had partitioned Poland and marked out their spheres of influence across Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Romania. So, yeah, that's a very important fact to mention, that by the start of this war, Russia and Nazi Germany was as like teammates, because they invaded Poland together. And I want to say before that Polish army was fighting for like up to 1 week, I think. I would say, and they just gave up because they had weak military power, and unfortunately they've been under occupation till the end of war. So part of the Poland being under Germany, part of the Poland being under Soviet Union, and if you ever learned anything about Poland, you might notice that a lot of their buildings, especially like you can see it in the Warsaw, they have a Soviet building style, and the most famous building in the Warsaw is a museum of science, I think, or house. I don't really remember how it name, but you can see it in the very city center. That's the buildings that's been built under Soviet Union occupation, and the same buildings they have in Moscow. So that's like a symbol that's left about these set times. And from late 1939 to early 1941, in a series of campaigns and treaties, Germany controlled much of continental Europe in a military alliance called the Axis with Italy and Japan, and other countries. Following the onset of campaigns in North Africa and East Africa and the fall of France in mid-1940s, the war continued primarily between the European Axis powers and the British Empire. So yeah, France, they didn't fight a lot with the Germans. They just accepted it as a fact, unfortunately, because France, they used to be a huge military power. They had lots of impacts on the world, and now they just gave up what they had. And that's to be honest, it was unbelievable fact. Then British Empire. British Empire was one of the major enemies of Germany, and they fought a lot to be independent, and they didn't have any occupation on their territories, because that's just like a separated island, Britain, and that's helped them a lot. So technically, Germans could reach them only by submarines, like warships, or aircrafts. Yeah, as I said it before, they bombed lots of in Germany. For example, I know that London been destroyed for about 40% during World War II, and lots of people, they just tried to save their life to go to London Underground. And for now, if you ever been to London Underground, you just need to know that during the World War II times, some stations just been safe place for Londoners, people, yeah, just for British people, and lots of other cities by seaside in Britain been destroyed hardly, unfortunately. So the war continued primarily between European Axis powers and the British Empire, with the war in the Balkans, the aerial battle of Britain, the Blitz of the UK, and the Battle of the Atlantic. In June 1941, Germany led the European Axis powers in an invasion of the Soviet Union, opening the Eastern Front, the largest land threat of war in history. So, they invaded. Germany invaded Soviet Union on 22nd of June 1941, and the most destroyed territory was the actual territory of Ukraine, and they took all the Germans' power, and most fights have been on the nowadays known as Ukraine territories, and also Belarus been destroyed hardly, and Hitler have had the plans to reach Moscow, but they didn't really do it. So Japan aimed to dominate Asia and the Pacific, and by 1937 was at the war with the Republic of China. In December 1941, Japan attacked American and British territories with near simultaneous offensives against Southern Asia and the Central Pacific, including an attack on Pearl Harbor, which resulted in the United States and the United Kingdom declaring war against Japan. The European Axis powers declared war on the US in solidarity. Japan soon conquered much of the Western Pacific, but its advances were halted in 1942 after losing the critical Battle of Midway. Germany and Italy were defeated in North Africa and at Stalingrad in the Soviet Union. Key setbacks in 1943, including German defeats on the Eastern Front. The Allied invasions of Sicily and Italian mainland and Allied offensive in the Pacific caused the Axis powers their initiative and forced them to a strategic retreat on all fronts. In 1944, the Western Allies invaded German-occupied France, while the Soviet Union regained its territorial losses and pushed Germany and its allies back. During 1944 to 1945, Japan suffered revolts in mainland Asia, while the Allies gripped the Japanese Navy and captured key Western Pacific islands. The war in Europe concludes with the liberation of German-occupied territories, the invasion of Germany by the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, culminated in the fall of Berlin to Soviet troops. Hitler's suicide and the German unconditional surrender on 8 May 1945. Following the refusal of Japan to surrender on the terms of the Potsdam Declaration, the US dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima on 6 August and Nagasaki on 9 August, faced with imminent invasion of the Japanese archipelago. The possibility of more atomic bombings and the Soviet Union's declared entry into the war against Japan on the eve of invading Manchuria. Japan announced on 10 August its invasion to surrender, signing a surrender document on 2 December 1945. World War II changed the political alignment and social structure of the world and set the foundation for the international order for the rest of the 20th century and into the 21st century. The United Nations was established to foster international cooperation and prevent conflicts with the victorious great powers. China, France, the Soviet Union, the UK, and the US becoming the permanent members of its Security Council. The Soviet Union and the US emerged as a rival superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. In the wake of European devastation, the influence of its great powers wanted triggered the decolonization of Africa and Asia. Most countries whose industries had been damaged moved towards economic recovery and expansion. So, start and end dates. So, World War II began in Europe on 1st September 1939 with the German invasion of Poland and the United Kingdom and France declaration of the war on Germany 2 days later on 3rd September 1939. Dates for the beginning of the Pacific War include the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War was on 7th July 1937 or the earlier Japanese invasion of Manchuria. On 19 September 1931, authors followed the British historian A.G.P. Taylor, who stated that the Sino-Japanese War and war in Europe and its colonies occurred simultaneously, and the two wars became World War II in 1941. Other theorized starting dates for World War II include the Italian invasion of Abyssinia on 3rd October 1935. The British historian Anthony Beevor views of beginning of World War II as the battles of Halkyn Gol fought between Japan and the forces of Mongolia and the Soviet Union from May to September 1931. Also views the Spanish Civil War as the start of prelude to World War II. The exact date of the war is not universally agreed upon. It was generally accepted at the time that the war ended with the armistice of 15th August 1945, rather than with the formal surrender on Japan on 2nd September 1945, which officially ended the war in Asia. A peace treaty between Japan and the Allies was signed in 1951, and 1990 treaty regarding Germany's future allowed the reunification of East and West Germany to take place and resolved most post-World War II issues. No formal peace treaty between Japan and the Soviet Union was ever signed, although the state of war between the two countries was terminated by the Soviet-Japanese Joint Declaration of 1956, which also restored full diplomatic relationships between them. So I want to talk more about aftermath. So what happened after this war? So the Allies established occupation administration in Austria and Germany, both initially divided between Western and Eastern occupation zones controlled by the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, respectively. However, their paths soon diverged. In Germany, the Western and Eastern occupation zones controlled by the Western Allies and the Soviet Union officially ended in 1949, with the respective zones becoming separate countries, West Germany and East Germany. In Austria, however, occupation continued until 1955, when a joint settlement between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union permitted the reunification of Austria as a democratic state, officially non-allied with any political bloc, also in practice having better relations with the Western Allies. A denazification program in Germany led to the prosecution of Nazi war criminals in the Nuremberg trials and the removal of ex-Nazis from power, although this policy moved towards amnesty and the reintegration of ex-Nazis into the West German society. Germany lost a quarter of its pre-war 1937's territory. Among the eastern territories, Silesia, Neumark, and most of Pomerania were taken over by Poland, and East Prussia was divided between Poland and the Soviet Union, followed by expulsion to Germany of the 9 million Germans from these provinces, as well as 3 million Germans from the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. By the 1950s, 1/5 of West Germans were refugees from the East. The Soviet Union also took over the Polish provinces east of the Curzon Line, from which 2 million Poles were expelled. Northern East Romania, parts of the eastern Finland, and the Baltic states were annexed into the Soviet Union. Italy lost its monarchy, colonial empire, and some European territories. In an effort to maintain world peace, the Allies formed the United States of Unions, which officially came into existence on 21st October 1945. and adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 as a common standard for all member nations. The great powers that were the victors of the war, France, China, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and the United States, became the permanent members of the UN Security Council. The 5 permanent members remained so to the present, although there have been 2 seats changed between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China in 1971, and between the Soviet Union and its successor state, the Russian Federation, following the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. The alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union had begun to deteriorate even before the war was over. Besides Germany, the rest of Europe was also divided in the Western and Soviet spheres of influence. Most Eastern and Central European countries fell into the Soviet sphere, which led to establishment of communist-led regimes with full of partial support of the Soviet occupation authorities. As a result, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Albania became Soviet satellite states. Communist Yugoslavia conducts a fully independent policy, causing tension with the Soviet Union. A communist uprising in Greece was put down with Anglo-American support, and the country remained aligned with the West. Post-war division of the world was formalized by 2 international military alliances. The United States led NATO and the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact. The long period of political tensions and military competitions between them, the Cold War, would be accompanied by an unprecedented arms race and number of proxy wars throughout the world. In Asia, the United States led the occupation of Japan and administered Japan's former islands in the Western Pacific, while the Soviets annexed South Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands. Korea, formerly under Japanese colonial rule, was divided and occupied by the Soviet Union in the north and the United States in the south between 1945 and 1948. Separate republics emerged on both sides of the 38th parallel in 1948, each claiming to be legitimate government for all of Korea, which led ultimately to the Korean War. In China, nationalist and communist forces resumed the civil war. In June 1946, communist forces were victorious and established the People's Republic of China on the mainland, while nationalists forced retreated to Taiwan in 1949. In the Middle East, the Arab rejection of the United Nations partition plan for Palestine and the creation of Israel marked the escalation of the Arab-Israeli conflict, while European powers attempted to retain some or all of their colonial empires. Their losses of prestige and resources during the war rendered as these unsuccessful, leading to decolonization. The global economy suffered heavily from the war, although participant nations were affected differently. The United States emerged much richer than any other nation, leading to a baby boom, and by 1950 its gross domestic product per person was much higher than any of other powers, and it dominated the world economy. The Allied occupational authorities pursued a policy of industrial disarmament in Western Germany from 1945 to 1948. Due to international trade interdependencies, this policy led to an economical stagnation in Europe and delayed European recovery from the war for several years. At the Bretton Woods Conference in July 1944, the Allied nations drew up an economic framework for the post-war world. The agreement created the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, which later became the part of the World Bank Group. The Bretton Woods system lasted until 1973. Recovery began with the mid-1948 currency reform in Western Germany and was sped up by the liberalization of Europe economic policy. Then the US Marshall Plan economic aid was directly and indirectly caused. The post-1948 West German recovery has been called the German economic miracle. Italy also experienced an economic boom, and the French economy rebounded. By contrast, the United Kingdom was in a state of economic ruin, and although receiving a quota of the total Marshall Plan assistance more than any other European countries, and continued in relative economic decline for decades. The Soviet Union, despite enormous human and material losses, also experienced rapid increase in production in the immediate post-war era. Having seized and transferred most of the Germany industrial plants and exacted war preparation from its satellite states. Japan recovered much later. China returned to its pre-war industrial production by 1952. So let's talk now about the impact that's made this world affected by World War II. So, estimated for the total numbers of casualties in the war vary because many deaths were unrecorded. Most suggest that some 60 million people died in the war, including about 20 million military personnel and 40 million civilians. The Soviet Union alone lost around 27 million people during the war, including 8.7 million military and 18 million civilians deaths. A quarter of the total people in the Soviet Union were wounded or killed. Germany sustained 5.3 million military losses, mostly on the Eastern Front and during the final battles in Germany. An estimated 11 to 17 million civilians died as a direct or as an indirect result of Hitler's racist policies, including mass killing of around 6 million Jews, along with the Roma, homosexuals, at least 1.9 million ethnic Poles and millions of other Slavs, including Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, and other ethnic and minority groups. Between 1941 and 1945, more than 200,000 ethnic Serbs, along with Gypsies and Jews, were persecuted and murdered by the Axis-aligned Croatian Ustaš in Yugoslavia. Concurrently, Muslims and Croats were persecuted and killed by Serbs nationalist Chetniks, with an estimated 50 to 68,000 victims. Also, more than 100,000 Poles were massacred by the Ukrainian insurgent army in the Volhynia massacres between 1943 and 1945. At the same time, about 10,000 to 15,000 Ukrainians were killed by the Polish Home Army and other Polish units in reciprocal attacks. In Asia and the Pacific, the number of killed people by Japanese troops remains contested. According to R.G. Rommel, the Japanese killed between 3 million and more than 10 million people, with the most probable case of almost 6 million people. According to the British historian M.R.D. Foote, civilian deaths are between 10 million and 20 million, whereas Chinese military casualties are estimated to be over 5 million. Other estimates say that up to 30 million people, most of them civilians, were killed. The most infamous Japanese atrocity was the Nanjing massacre, in which 50 to 300,000 Chinese civilians were raped and murdered. Mitsuyoshi Himeta reported that 2.7 million casualties occurred during the Three Isles policy. General Yasuri Okamura implemented the policy in Hebei and Shandong. Axis forces employed biological and chemical weapons, and the Imperial Japanese Army used a variety of such weapons during its invasion occupation of China and in early conflicts against the Soviets. Both the Germans and Japanese tested such weapons against civilians and sometimes on prisoners of war. The Soviet Union was responsible for the Katyn massacre of 22,000 Polish officers and the imprisonment or execution of hundreds of thousands of political prisoners by the NKVD secret police, along with the mass civilian deportations to Serbia, in the Baltic states and eastern Poland, annexed by the Red Army. Soviet soldiers committed mass rapes in occupied territories, especially in Germany. The exact number of German women and girls raped by the Soviet troops during the war and occupation is uncertain, but historical estimates their numbers are likely in the hundreds of thousands and possibly as many as 2 million, while figures for women raped by German soldiers in the Soviet Union go as far as 10 million. The mass bombing of cities in Europe and Asia has often been called a war crime. Although no positive or specific customary international humanitarian law with respect of aerial warfare existed before or during World War II. The USAF bombed a total of 67 Japanese cities, killing 393,000 civilians, including the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and destroyed 65% of built-up areas. Genocide, concentration camps, and slave labor. So, Nazi Germany, under the dictatorship of Adolf Hitler, was responsible for murdering about 6 million Jews in what is known as a Holocaust. They also murdered an additional 4 million others who were deemed unworthy of life. As part of a program of deliberate extermination, in effect becoming a genocidal state. Soviet Poles were kept in especially unbearable conditions, and 3.6 million Soviet Poles out of 5.7 million died in Nazi camps during the war. In addition of concentration camps, death camps were created in Nazi Germany to exterminate people on an industrial scale. Nazi Germany extensively used forced laborers. About 12 million Europeans from Germany occupied countries were abducted and used as a slave workforce in German industry, agriculture, and war economy. The Soviet Gulag became a de facto system of deadly camps during 1942-43, when wartime privation and hunger caused numerous deaths of inmates, including foreign citizens of Poland and other countries occupied in 1939, 1939 to 1940 by the Soviet Union as well as Axis Poles. By the end of the war, most Soviet Poles liberated from Nazi camps and many repatriated civilians were detained in specific filtration camps where they were subjected to NKVD evaluation, and 226,127 were sent to the Gulag as real or perceived Nazi collaborators. Japanese prisoners of war camps, many of which were used as labor camps, also had higher death rates. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East found the death rate of Western prisoners was 27%, 7 times that of Poles under the Germans and Italians, while 37,583 prisoners from the UK, 28,500 from the Netherlands, and 14,473 from the United States were released after the surrender of Japan. The number of Chinese released was only 56. At least 5 million Chinese civilians from the northern China and Manchukuo were enslaved between 1935 and 1941 by the East Asia Development Board, or Kokin, for work in mines and war industries. After 1942, the number reached 10 millions. In Java, between 4 and 10 millions. Ramusha, that's a million laborers in Japanese. were first to work by the Japanese military. About 270,000 of these Japanese laborers were sent to other Japanese-held areas in southern Asia, and only 52,000 were repatriated to Java. So let's talk now about occupation. So in Europe, occupation came under two forms: in Western, Northern, and Central Europe. Germany established economic policies through which it collected roughly 69.5 billion Reichsmarks. Currently, that's about 27.8 billion US dollars. By the end of the war, these figures does not include the plunder of industrial products, military equipment, raw materials, and other goods. Thus, the income from occupied nations was over 40% of the income Germany collected from taxation, a figure which increased to nearly 40% of total German income as the war went on. In the East, the intended gains of Lebensraum were never attained as the fluctuating front lines and Soviet source Earth's policies denied resources from to the German invaders. Unlike in the West, the Nazi racial policy encouraged extremely brutally against what is considered to be the inferior people of Slavic descent. Most German advances were thus followed by mass atrocities and war crimes. The Nazis killed an estimated 2.77 million ethnic Poles during the war, in addition to Polish Jewish victims of the Holocaust. Although resistance groups formed in most occupied territories, they did not significantly hamper German operations in either the East or the West until late 1943. In Asia, Japan joined the nations under its occupation as being part of the Greater Asia cooperative sphere, essentially a Japanese hegemony which is claimed was purposes of liberating colonized peoples. Also, Japanese forces were sometimes welcomed as liberations from Europe domination. Japanese war crimes frequently turned local public opinion against them. During Japan's initial conquest, it captured 4 million barrels of oil left behind by retreating Allied forces, and by 1943 was able to get production in the Dutch East Indies up to 50 million barrels of oil, 76% of its 1940 output rate. So, home front and production. So, in Europe, before the outbreak of the war, the Allies had significant advantages in both populations and economics. In 1938, the Western Allies, United Kingdom, France, Poland, and the British dominions had a 30% larger population and 30% higher gross domestic product than the European Axis powers, Germany and Italy. Including colonies, and the Allies had more than 5-to-1 advantage in population and nearly 2-to-1 advantage in GDP. In Asia, at the same time, China had roughly 6 times the population of Japan, but only at 89% higher GDP. This is reduced to 3 times the population and only as 38% higher GDP if Japanese colonies are included. The United States produced about 2/3 of all munitions used by the Allies in World War II, including warships, transports, warplanes, artillery, tanks, trucks, and ammunition. Though the Allies' economic and population advantages were largely mitigated during the initial rapid blitzkrieg attacks of Germany and Japan, they became the decisive factor by 1942, after the United States and Soviet Union joined the Allies and the war evolved into one of attrition. While the Allies' ability to outproduce the Axis is often attributed to the Allies having more access to natural resources, other factors such as Germany and Japan's reluctance to employ women in the labor force, Allies' strategic bombing, and Germany's late shift to a war economy contributed significantly. Additionally, neither Germany or Japan planned to fight a protracted war and had not equipped themselves to do so. To improve their production, Germany and Japan used millions of slave laborers. Germany used about 12 million people, mostly from Eastern Europe, while Japan used more than 18 million people in Far East Asia. Advances in technology and its application. So aircraft were used for reconnaissance and as fighters, bombers, and ground support, and each role developed considerably. Innovations included airlift and strategic bombing. Anti-aircraft weaponry also advanced, including defenses such as radar and surface-to-air artillery, in particular the introduction of the proximity fuse. The use of the jet aircraft was pioneered and led to jets becoming standard in forces worldwide. Advances were made in nearly every aspect of naval warfare, most notably with aircraft carriers and submarines, although aeronautical warfare had relatively little success at the start of the war. Actions at Taranto, Pearl Harbor, and the Coral Sea established the carrier's dominant capital ship. The Atlantic escort carriers became a vital part of Allied convoys, increasing the effective protection radius to helping to close the mid-Atlantic gap. Carriers were also more economical than battleships due to the relatively low cost of aircraft, and because helping to close them, and because they're not required to be as heavily armored. Submarines, which had proved to be an effective weapon during the First World War, were expected by all combatants to be important in the Second. The British focus developed on anti-submarine weaponry and tactics such as sonar and convoys, while Germany focused on improving its offensive capability with designs such as the Type 7 submarine and Wolfpack tactics, gradually improving Allied technology such as the Lead-Light, Hedgehog, Squid, and Homing torpedoes proved effective against German submarines. Land warfare changed from the statistic front lines of trench warfare of World War I, which had relied on improved artillery that outmatched the speed of both infantry and cavalry, to increase mobility and combined arms. The tank, which has been used predominantly for infantry support in the First World War, had evolved in the primary weapon. In the late 1930s, tank design was considerably more advanced than it had been during World War I, and advances continued throughout the war, with increases in speed, armor, and firepower. At the start of the war, most commanders thought enemy tanks should be met by tanks with the superior specifications. This idea was challenged by the poor performance of the relatively light early tank guns against armor and German doctrine of avoiding tank versus tank combat. This, alongside with German use of combined arms, were among the key elements of their highly successful blitzkrieg tactics across Poland and France. Many means of destroying tanks, including indirect artillery, anti-tank guns, mines, short-range infantry, anti-tank weapons, and other tanks were used. So lots of weapons been used during the war, and countries that have been involved in the war, they used their most useful, most powerful weapons, the newest scientific inventions, and anyway, they had some problems with their creations. I know that during the war they have lots of problems with the tanks because of Germany and the countries they invaded, like Soviet Union. They had much different climates, and during the winter times they had lots of problems with their tanks. They just stopped working, and could be fun for someone, or just unexpected reason why Germans lost lots of their tanks in Soviet Union. That's because of rats. They just ate some parts of fiber they used to connect the power of a tank. I mean, like these cables on the side of the tanks, they just ate them, and that's why Germany had lots of broken tanks. It definitely didn't stop them, but it was helpful for the Soviet Union. Yeah, so Reds, even Reds helped them. Then about the conflicts. So Nazi, before they invaded the Soviet Union, Nazis, they have lots of propaganda that they wanted to be welcome in the Soviet Union states by the just civilians people, and they had some collaborators, but to be honest, most people they just weren't grateful to them, and of course they didn't want to be a part of occupation, and it was known in Soviet Union that if most of the people they just went to war to fight for their land, for their country, and that's why they had so many deaths. Soviet Union lost the very most percentage of people than other countries did. There are a few famous battles that you might heard of: the defense of Kiev, Stalingrad is the most famous one, and I know about the Stalingrad. It's this city been in a circle, fully surrounded by German German troops, and they had a massive hunger in this town. So, and they've been bombed, and it was so hard to survive in this town, and very few people survived it, unfortunately. I know that for example, just for one person you could be given a half of a slice of bread a day. It's probably, for nowadays people, it's unbelievable. How can you survive just having a half slice of a bread, just that much little? And but it was unfortunately the reality of the war, and it was winter times. It was quite cold, and I remember I've read some notes from people that been on the defense of the city, Soviet Union troops, and they said that they wanted some parts of it battles just because they had lots of grenades, and it just saved them. So it was quite interesting experience to read this, because it's hard to believe that people could survive this. Like, they could just give up, but they didn't, and they saved lots of people, because they just stopped the fascism in Europe. They stopped the Nazi German. Very important to mention that Russia, as you know, it's Russia, but it was known as the Soviet Union before, and it wasn't only just the Russia winner. So this wins also contributes to Ukraine, to Belarus, to Baltic countries, as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, because people from all these states been in the fights, and it's just not really correct to say that Russia won this war. And also Despite that, the important thing that's happened during this conflict and between Russia and Germany, and what led to Soviet Union win is that United States, they gave a huge military aid and support to Soviet Union to destroy the German occupation, and they've been given really hundreds and thousands of military aid, and that's really saved them, so they could continue destroying of their enemy. Also, they had a lots of war productions and factories. They have been working just on a military purposes, and they have lots of also people working on the military forces, and all the countries have been changed their economical style just on a war times economy, and they just lots of people, they just were working to make their country win this and survive these hard times. So about the Germany. So Germany been divided by two halves, Eastern and Western German, and you might heard about Berlin Wall. So Berlin was divided by two sides, and different parts were under control of Western Allies or Soviet Union for other one here, and you can see it that's why Western countries, they are more powerful than Soviet Union and nowadays Russia, because the parts of Germany that's been under Western Allies control, these cities, they are the most developed ones. They look really nice, and that's are the richest regions in Germany at this moment. But you can't say about the states that's been controlled by the Soviet Union, unfortunately, because yes, Germany is the biggest economy in the Europe, but the parts of Germany that have been under Soviet Union control is quite poor if you're gonna compare it with a Western Allies controlled states. Oh, I mean, like part of Germany, yeah, and that says a lot. And unfortunately, Soviet Union technically started this war. Yeah, not only Nazi German did it, but by the end of war, they've been one of the winners because they've been invaded by German. So they really sad that lots of people died in this war. And by the way, the interesting fact is that before these world wars, people did have the actual passports, so they could travel around Europe just without these permissions as we have nowadays. But after these wars and conflicts, the states, they decided to create these passports and to control the traffic of the people, and to do not allow just random people to get into their country. Quite interesting fact that Soviet Union had quite a lot of collaborators, especially from Russia, and a lot of their troops after prison, they decided to fight on the German side, and they had one of the officer that used his troops that he took control of. He just decided to go on the German side and fight for German Nazis, and that's quite could be unbelievable, because they believed that German could save their nation, and they wanted to have a control after this comment that Soviet Union had at these war times. So yeah, it's sad to know that some people, they've been Nazis, or they supported fascism, even if they've been not from Germany, they've been to other countries, and we still have some people in the world like this, and that's very sad. I hope that they'll change their mind, that they shouldn't be like this, and I hope that this such a massive war on conflicts will not happen, and people will find the solutions for this, because that's a world changing thing, and it's changed. I think it changed everyone's lives and impacted on every human life in this world.